Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, March 1st, 2023, and today we're going to be taking a look at 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our questions that we answer today from the news articles we've been collecting and collating and digesting over the last few days that we post on Mondays in our newsletter format called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And that comes out Monday, either direct to your inbox through email, and you can subscribe to that free of charge at our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe, dropping the links to that site as well as this week's most recent edition of the email newsletter version. And if you prefer to get your international ed news via LinkedIn, we have a LinkedIn version of that as well. And we're fortunate enough that over the last month or so, we've crossed the 1,000 subscribers threshold for the newsletter. I'm very proud to be one of the few international ed news and social media ed news specific outlets that so many of you have taken to heart and make a regular part of your weekly international edification. So thanks so much for making use of the newsletter and for subscribing to that, and then making part of the Midweek Roundup as part of your journey each week as well. For those listening either live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter, we also have an audio-only version of this podcast, of this Midweek Roundup that you can download from your favorite podcast providers, free of charge again, to all who would like that international edification in their ears while they walk, work out, or do their jobs each day. Thanks again for being a part of this journey with SMIE Consulting. So our 3 questions today are going to start with a topic near and dear to our heart at SMIE, because SMIE stands for Social Media and International Ed Consulting. And what we do, when we have stories that overlap between international education and social media, that kind of makes our hearts full. And in terms of what we'll talk about first is this question of what is the future of international student recruitment via social media? We've seen a lot, obviously, that happened during the pandemic that forced everybody to commit everything online because they weren't able to do physical travel anymore. That relied on social media outlets to get messages across for live events, for Instagram takeovers, for virtual fairs and all of that. But specifically about social media, how has that... we've seen the rise of social media, obviously, over the last 18 years now. That the major platforms have been second nature for our student markets around the world. Those platforms that they focus on change from year to year and country to country, as we know, and that requires a level of sophistication if you're going to be targeting students in particular markets with messaging to make sure that your voice is being heard on the right platforms. So that's all the background context of kind of what's led up to this point in time with regards to social media and international student recruitment. So what we've found, and this article is from our friends at intl, very good, reliable data source for and consulting that really digs deep into your institutional messaging, into your target markets, into where you need to have a presence, and I really applaud them for all their work. But the article is kind of a summary point of all of their recent pieces they do on different platforms, whether it's TikTok for marketing, internet marketing, whether it's Snapchat, Instagram, building an audience in general if you're new to international ed or new to social media overseas, text messaging, email, A/B testing, chatbots, all of that. They've got some great guides that they put together over the last few months that are kind of one-on-one stuff that I would recommend for anyone who's even those that have been doing it a while. It's good to have some refreshers and some fresh eyes on what is actually happening out in the marketplace. So some great resources that intl provides that will help, I think, give you insight into what different platforms are what the messaging needs to be, the timing and the format of those messages that you want to get out on particular platforms. They've got some great content that you can get links to from this article. So definitely recommend that and make that a read if you have. Pass it along to folks who are doing any international social media for you, so that they're aware of kind of the best practices, frankly, in the game when it comes to international social media. So that's in terms of the future of it. The other side of the coin is what we've been seeing as of late regarding platforms like TikTok and WeChat. Have just been told in the state of Nevada, our NSHE, National Nevada State Higher Education Board, has passed, their communications committee has passed down regulations that if that TikTok, WeChat, and Grammarly, of all things, should be removed from university devices and not be used. And they did give a caveat that unless their use is mission critical to whatever use they're being used for, in terms of driving student university-focused mission statements. So this is not excuse me, this is not as broad a ban as we've seen it's not an outright ban even, but it's saying it should be should not be used, WeChat, LinkedIn, or excuse me, WeChat, TikTok, and Grammarly, for security reasons. Again, a lot of data privacy concerns that we've seen in the conversations related to TikTok, also impacting WeChat and apparently Grammarly as well. In Grammarly's case, I'm not sure where those security deficiencies lie and who owns that product, because obviously with TikTok and WeChat, those are Chinese products, Chinese-owned products, and the parent companies are responsible to the Chinese government and have to provide data to them when it's asked, without question. It's just part of the nature of the beast over there. But these kinds of government in stepping in, whether at the state level or the federal level, we've seen some stories that we're going to be reporting on this coming week that we've also had Canada. This is also decided to, excuse me, is it Canada? Yeah. That Canada, or no, excuse me, European Commission has banned TikTok from official devices. That's also a story I'll be sharing with you. And we'll see a story next week that Canada has, government officials have banned the use of TikTok for similar security concerns. Now, we know these are to do with relationships with China and data sharing and what information gets onto TikTok. Is shared with the Chinese Communist Party. That's the driving force, and now apparently on a bipartisan level with regard to congressional action in the United States, we may soon be seeing TikTok ban bills floated and potentially passed. What impact will that have? We already know that within Congress there's bans on TikTok on U.S. government devices. Applies to the federal government as well. So several states have implemented these TikTok bans, again, for security concerns. So they can't all be wrong, I don't think. So there's something there, and that there are certain platforms that you may not be able to use potentially to reach intended international student markets. And if we're maybe in a little bit more fortunate position right now in Nevada that it hasn't been outright banned, that if it's still mission critical to our mission as a university and for various reasons, one of our mission pieces is growing our international population, and China is an important part of that. We're looking into ways to do that, use social media more effectively to reach China and other countries around Asia that are huge drivers of students to the United States. We need to have content, obviously, to fill those platforms, translated content as well. So there's a whole network of things we're needing to do to get it set up. But to be honest with you, TikTok has been used by the university. There's an official UNLV TikTok team as well as an undergraduate admissions TikTok team. So they've been in operation for over a year now and have been getting some good traction with their content that they've been putting out. But is that mission critical to reaching students in the U.S.? Yes, if you might say, given that 100 million people in the United States are on TikTok, and good percentages of those are in the college age demographic. So we might be okay. but that's not the case in other states where it's an outright ban on any university device cannot be used. These social channels like TikTok cannot be used. WeChat is a bigger one because that had been floated a couple of years ago, particularly during the Trump administration. There was threats of a TikTok and WeChat ban for similar reasons over data security, and that WeChat talk kind of died away, but it's coming back and it's affecting us in Nevada now. But WeChat is the platform where everything happens in China. It is kind of like Facebook on steroids with PayPal and Instagram and YouTube and rolled into one, and LinkedIn all rolled into one. So there's some real challenges on being able to reach students in China without access to their social media ecosystem. And WeChat would be the number one way to do that. So we may still have options to do that. We're not sure. We haven't really crossed that bridge yet. We're still months out from making that decision. But for those that are already invested in WeChat and TikTok and really using that as a tool to recruit students in China, obviously it's called something different in China, but similar philosophy there, same parent company. What are you going to do? Is that something you'll still be able to rely on? And what it boils down to is social media. There'll always be social media around, or versions of it. Where the students are might change from year to year, or decade to decade, or country to country. But there'll still be ways to reach students using these tools, even though one platform might get banned. For example, TikTok and a lot of over 150 Chinese apps in the App Store have been banned in India for years. So it's not unusual for these things to happen in other countries. Of course, VPNs can get you around that to be able to access. That's where a country completely bans access to a particular app. Maybe VPNs will get you around that in India. I don't know, but certainly VPNs can get you into our social media networks if you're in China. If you have get over the Great Firewall. But there's some real challenges coming forward. But I think. Politics does tend to rear its head in terms of recruitment when it comes to technology, and we've seen as we have with regards to China and the China initiative during the Trump years. Even though that's no longer in place, there's still concerns over technology transfer and intellectual property theft going to China from the U.S. And there are Karen Fisher from the Chronicle, her Latitude newsletter this week highlighted Chinese American professors still getting hassled at the border for their ties, their research ties and what they were doing in China and that type of thing. So it's a highly politicized topic, and technology and social media is part of that world now. There are threats to particular platforms continuing to be used by U.S. institutions to reach students overseas. So having a flexible strategy that allows you to repurpose efforts from one social channel to another, or to focus more on IMing or text messaging to student groups through other messaging tools that might be available in country. You need to have flexibility, and that will mean adapting your messaging, because it's same format does not work across all social platforms, and certainly not all messaging platforms. So how you respond to that is you need to be fairly nimble and have kind of in case of app bans, do this. In case of inability to access certain student markets with certain platforms, do this. So there's a need for flexibility in social, no matter what you do anyway, just because of the highly changeable nature and fickle nature. And there's still a fair bit of experimentation that needs to happen to really dial in your strategy to get those kind of posts and content that's going to resonate most with your intended audience. So I think moving forward, it's keeping the right mindset from the outset in terms of what you're able to do and how flexible you can be to allow your strategy to really reach its full potential. And a flexible one is certainly going to be one that will enjoy more success in the long term. So that's what we got for question number one. Question number two, a topic we talk about Every so often here on the Roundup because, frankly, it's one that has gone ignored for far too long, and I think is really the missing link in tying a successful university experience to a successful alumni experience, and that has everything to do with career services. And the question is, does your career services office meet international students' needs? And this is can be a very delicate subject on many college campuses. If you have significant volume of international students over the years, likely this is something that you've had to address from your ISSS office, student life offices that deal with these kind of things, or depending on where it sits in the university structure. At UNLV, its career services sits now within a reorg that we did last year within our academic affairs unit. And that is in my opinion, it's a positive move for us because also under academic affairs is the enrollment, undergraduate admissions, as well as international student and scholar services, those offices that deal most directly with students as they're arriving and once they're on campus. But that career services piece is so critical to the outcomes that you need to be documenting now more than ever. And why do you need to document those? Because that's what the parents, that's what the students are asking. Because they're making, when they commit to send their son or daughter or to commit themselves to come to the United States for study, they're committing tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars of their family's resources to pay for their education at your institution. And that commitment to do that, for most students, most international students, they're committing to you sight unseen. They're probably not going to visit until they show up for orientation. They may have had friends that go there. They may have had a chat with a current student or a recent alumni. They may have seen videos from current students or alums or had a conversation with faculty member, but they haven't actually been there. So they're trusting everybody that they're associating with in finding out information about your institution, about why they need to come to your institution, for send their son or daughter to you, or send themselves to your institution. And it's a huge investment. And it's like buying a car on an app. That happens regularly nowadays, but it's the commodification of higher education that has caused the ability for students and international students. That's the way they have to do it, unless they are super wealthy and make all these trips to campuses that they're applying to and are being admitted to. So the real need to have demonstrable data, and if not data, at least anecdotal stories of successes of graduates from your institution across a range of programs, not just your best program, but across a range of programs that you're trying to get new international students to come to. If you don't have the data or anecdotal stories of what students were able to do with your degree in terms of securing jobs, securing careers, going for advanced study, research, whatever it might be. If you don't have that documented, don't have those pathways secured, that data secured, those stories secured, that is a huge missed opportunity for your prospective student audiences in terms of stories you could have to share with your incoming students about why your institution is going to be the best choice for them. And here's the demonstrable proof. Here are the jobs that our international graduates have gotten in these majors. Here's some of the top alumni who've graduated from our school from overseas. And here's what they're doing now with what they, based on what they studied. Those stories make your job as an international admissions representative so much easier when you have that to tell your story for you, because those are those students, recent grads, alumni who have been successful at your institution and have got the proof of it, have that job, have that position, have that the opportunities that they've had because of where they went to university. That's what you need to tell your story for you. We say our current students are our best advocates. Right after them, for telling the student experience. Right after that, your best advocates are your alum, are your parents of your current students, those types of things, or recent grads. Those are the things that you need to have, the pieces of your puzzle, the tools in your arsenal to help tell your story to future students and parents. those outcomes matter now more than ever. Coming out of the pandemic where everybody's more price sensitive, there's still an economic downturn in the world, a global recession happening. What the impact of that means is that people are more price sensitive no matter where they are. So they're going to be asking the kinds of questions that you might not have the answers to. You might have general university career services data on employability. Within 6 months, 90% of our students are employed. Within a year, 75% are working in their field of study, all of that. For international students, it's different because they don't have a year. They have 2 months after they graduate to get into a job through their OPT that they're approved for. And then they have a limited window when they can do that OPT. I ask this question often when I talk with university colleagues is when it comes to this outcomes question, do you have those stories from career services, success stories, or from your alumni office that you can bring in? And they go, not really, not on the international side. Do you have any of that international data? No, not really. Guess where you do have some of that data? Your ISSS office. In SEVIS, you know, you have to have documented where your students who are on OPT have gotten jobs. You can also do that for CPT. You can get lists of where you have to do some data mining. It's not very easily accessible. Nothing in SEVIS is. But you can get lists and find out where your current students on OPT are working. And from that, you can mine some data from that to say, match students to majors and what their potential employers that they are, or employers that they are working for currently, and you can have that and share that with future students and parents. We have 25 students currently working at Tesla. We have 2 students working at Oracle. We have 10 students working at Google. There's another 15 at Amazon. If you have that data and those numbers, and you can say these are international students that are currently in that position at those companies, that is gold. That is recruitment gold. And too often, universities don't have that. Don't have that when it comes to international students. And there's an article, University World News article this week about Chinese students in Australia and having the difficulties in the employment market, getting the best jobs and that type of thing. The link that I'll post now has a link to it, or excuse me, has to this story. It shares some of the frustrations, and that is, there's a lot in terms of expectations in the workplace, and in terms of group work and projects and that type of thing, and how sometimes Chinese students don't, because of cultural norms, don't do well in certain circumstances. So it's about learning those expected practices and behaviors in the workplace. And there's talk about how to explain these cultural differences better to international students, in this case to Chinese students. So there's an article about that. There's also from the Pi News looking at Australia and Canada, where the key to sustainable growth in international student recruitment is, as they put it, based on career services investment. So again, talking about some of the things that we're talking about now, that's showing those outcomes and proving that that you have the services in place to get students ready for the work world, not just preparing them for their job and that they're going to do based on their academic program, but for the skills that they need to have to do well in the work world, in terms of how to interview, how to write a resume, put together a resume, write a cover letter, all of these things that are kind of lost arts in a lot of places based on a few searches I've been on in recent years. There's just a lack of preparation, really, in a lot of ways for the kind of things that career services can be doing for international students to get them ready for a very different market than what they might be facing back home. And there are services out there that we can and should be connecting our students with in their home countries, in global markets where they might be looking for jobs outside the U.S. if that's what they choose to do. And oftentimes, if they don't get an immediate job through OPT, they have to start looking elsewhere. So we have to be sensitive to those needs. But knowing who to turn to and who to refer students to, that also needs to be a piece of that puzzle. The university that's profiled in related to this career services investment piece is University of Hull in England, and they also have there's an upcoming webinar this week as well. Maybe I think it was yesterday, where they were profiled about how they were able to boost their international numbers. More than double them in the course of 3 or 4 years during the pandemic. And it boils down to, and from one of my colleagues who from that side of the pond is coming, that it boiled down to a lot of huge growth from Nigeria and Pakistan for some reason. Huge number increasing from those two countries when. Then what that happens, how that affects their mix at the university. But in the end, this article I'm just putting the link to in the chat is very much about what they're doing to talk about the successes and leveraging that. There's most of you who've been following either our newsletter for SMIE Consulting or the Midweek Roundups when we talk about postgraduate work route, our post-study graduate work visa in England, the 2-year work-study visa that they have now. There's another article from the PI about some of the success stories that are coming out of that, and that students who have gone that route, the lion's share are enrolled or have jobs in their field, and that's certainly positive. Those, some 8 in 10 of those employed via the graduate route, according to the PI News, are in graduate level roles. So that's what you want. You want them in roles that are appropriate for their degrees. So that's going to be used as a success story to promote the UK 2-year postgraduate work route. So those are some of the things that our peer countries are doing. Canada, we know, has expanded work hours that current international students can do while they're doing their degrees. And we know that they have huge labor shortages in the marketplace right now due to declining domestic population growth, and that the need of these immigrant communities to fill these jobs is so important. And their policies are set up to help facilitate that. So there are ways where government can be helping promote the outcomes piece that we're talking about, and they so infrequently do, particularly when it comes to the United States. So that's the last bit on the career services. A lot more to say on that. I'm sure this won't be the last time we mention it. The final piece, the final question is, what drives your country's international education efforts? We long talk about how in the United States our policies, there is no national policy on international education, but in other countries, Canada, the UK, Australia, there's a much more of a working relationship and established national policies, or at least bodies that decide national policies, that government is bought into international education as in most of these countries as an export strategy. Are exporting their education to the world. And they're doing that in a number of different ways, through transnational education, through primarily bringing students to their shores to study at their institutions. And then, depending on the country, like Australia, like Canada, where there are labor shortages in certain fields, they're getting extra work permission. International students, when they graduate, are getting extra work permission to stay and work in that country. That is seen as a big driver. We mentioned Taiwan a couple weeks ago, that their new international ed policy in the future is going to be driven to use international students coming for study in certain fields to fill certain job shortages that they're expecting in their domestic labor market. Canada's doing the same thing. So the driver from a little bit bigger picture tends to be those labor meeting economic needs within the country. One of those economic needs the universities have is, and they often rely on, almost exclusively rely on, is the funding that international students bring to their institutions. And there's a good article from ISEF Monitor about the international agenda for universities remains focused on student recruitment. This was a result of a Nous group and Navitas survey of universities and more than 100 educational leaders, international ed leaders in Australia, Canada, and the UK, finds that internationalization means primarily student recruitment in most countries. 96% identify that as the primary driver of their internationalization efforts. And more crassly, that they, as many international education commentators will say, in certain countries, in Australia, UK, Canada, these universities, and to a lesser extent in the U.S., but certainly we'll talk about that in a minute, where international students are seen as cash cows. They're driving the ability for the university to keep its lights on, to fund new programs for research and other buildings that might go up on campus. All of that's coming from international student revenue. So international student recruitment is your number one driver for internationalization. Why you do internationalization, then the likelihood is that driver is primarily motivated by money. What that means for the institution. In the U.S., last week at the AIEA conference, that was very much the concern. Are we too focused on money in the U.S. and wanting to resist what colleagues in Australia, New Zealand, UK, Canada have done and been quite open about why they do what they do. Whereas in the U.S., we tend to think a little bit more in what we would call kind of the high-minded public diplomacy efforts to increase mutual understanding, like the State Department talks about. But in the U.S., we don't. That's not the only voice. We have the voice of Department of Commerce, where all they're doing is their main goal is to promote U.S. businesses, and that means using international education, higher education in the U.S. as an export, sixth highest export for the country in terms of value to the country. So they see that very much as a commercial aspect, as a financial value piece. So there's a lot more we can say on this question of what drives your country's international ed efforts. And in the U.S., I can safely say no one way in particular drives. It's really so as is many other things in the U.S. We're so decentralized. Each institution has its own real drivers for why they do what they do when it comes to internationalization. So we'll talk more about that in the weeks and months to come, to be sure. But that's all we have for today on the Roundup. And until next week, wish you the very best. Take care.